Dornbecker Children's Hospital on a sweltering summer evening. The elevator doors opened with a dry, mechanical beep. 2 nurses and a doctor in light blue scrubs wheeled a gurney swiftly down the hallway. On the stretcher lay a young black boy, around 7 years old, Max, moaning in pain. His face was twisted in agony, tears streamed down both cheeks, and he kept repeating 3 words over and over. "It hurts, Mommy!" Running alongside him was Nora, a black woman with curly hair hastily tied back with an elastic band, her eyes swollen from exhaustion and worry. She didn't scream, didn't panic. Her face had frozen, as if she were holding the weight of the world on her shoulders. She clung to the bed rail, gripping Max's tiny, trembling hand as they moved, whispering, "I'm here, baby. Mommy's right here." When the door to room 1 swung open, Max was pushed inside. The doctor gave quick medical instructions. Nora watched her son vanish into the sterile white light of the operating room, then stood frozen in the hallway, as if her whole body had just been taken apart. For a few fleeting seconds, she leaned her head against the cold wall, silent tears staining the wrinkled fabric of her old shirt. Hours passed as surgery took place. Once Max's condition had stabilized, he was transferred to the hospital's 5B wing. Unit 5B specialized in recovery care for pediatric patients with spinal injuries, neurological trauma, and accident-related conditions. At night, this place felt like a quiet world detached from the busy pulse of Portland. Here, every sound softened. The quiet hum of gurney wheels over linoleum floors, the steady rhythm of heart monitors like a whispered lullaby, and occasionally, the faint whimpers of children caught between dreams and pain. The air carried a unique blend of smells, antiseptic, plastic, and powdered formula, a scent that was oddly familiar, and yet enough to bring tears to the eyes of grown-ups. Max was taken into room 2, where another mother, Maria, sat silently in a fabric-covered chair beside a hospital bed. Her skin was pale like milk, with deep-set eyes and high, chiseled cheekbones, features that looked as though they had been carved from stone. One of Maria's hands held an unfinished book, while the other grasped the small hand of her daughter, Lucia, a girl about Max's age, asleep with her leg in a cast and a heart monitor affixed to her chest. Maria had been here for nearly 2 weeks. She knew every sound of the 5B wing, the wheeze of the vending machine at the end of the hall, the familiar footsteps of the night shift nurse. And now, the arrival of Max and Nora felt like a gust of new wind, not a gentle breeze, but a storm of exhaustion and chaos. Maria wasn't the type to open up easily. Since her husband, a soldier, lost his life while serving in Afghanistan 2 years ago, she had locked her emotions away behind a tightly sealed door. Everything in her life had become structured. Lucia's medication schedule, the timing of physical therapy sessions, the ideal number of hours for sleep. She needed discipline to survive the grief. Nora was the opposite. Awkward, worn down, with every emotion laid bare. That evening, after Max's surgery, he was wheeled into the bed next to Lucia's. Nora followed like a shadow, hovering over him, asking the nurses about every little detail, her dazed eyes barely grasping what had just happened. Maria glanced over. Her gaze wasn't unkind, but it was sharp enough that Nora could feel it. She was being judged. By early morning, Max was sleeping deeply under the effects of pain medication. Nora had slumped over in the metal chair beside his bed, a coat draped over her legs, her face etched with weariness. Her hair was messy, and the cheap shoes on her feet were torn at the heel. Maria sat cross-legged, still holding her worn-out book. But her eyes didn't return to the page. They stayed on the woman in the chair. For the first time in days, Maria couldn't read another word. The next morning, as pale sunlight filtered through the white curtains, Nora was up earlier than the nurses. She moved quietly, checking on Max, adjusting his IV line, wiping the sweat from his forehead with her own handkerchief. She didn't cry anymore. What remained was a resilience laced with helplessness. She whispered a few words of comfort to her son, then disappeared from the hallway. A young nurse told Maria that Nora had gone to work a morning shift at a nearby restaurant, making up for the evening one she had missed the day before. She left her phone number in case anything happens, the nurse added. Maria simply nodded, saying nothing. But something inside her stirred. That evening, When Nora returned, she was breathless, drenched in sweat, carrying a small paper bag filled with toiletries, a sandwich, and a bottle of water. She dropped into the chair, biting into the bread as she sorted through a stack of receipts, mumbling to herself, "Gotta ask for extra hours tomorrow if I want enough for his meds." She didn't know Maria had been watching her from a distance. The gaze was no longer sharp like the day before, just curious, or perhaps a flicker of empathy not yet named. They began to exchange a few brief interactions, at first, just nods, then a few polite questions. "My girl's name is Lucia. My son, Max. How long have you been here?" "Almost 2 weeks. She fell down the stairs during a seizure." "It must hurt a lot." "Yeah, but she's brave." Maria began to realize Nora wasn't the kind of mother who slacked off, even if her worn-out appearance might have led others to assume so. She took care of Max with tireless dedication, staying up through the night to fan him, folding towels neatly, and always asking the doctors detailed questions about his care. Nora, on the other hand, sensed that behind Maria's cold exterior, there was something broken. She often saw Maria sitting for hours without moving, staring blankly, flipping through the same worn book again and again. And every evening, Nora noticed Maria whispering something to a small photo tucked into a leather wallet, a man in military uniform. A week passed. Max had started talking with Lucia. The doctors encouraged both children to draw and play games to help with emotional recovery. Until one afternoon, Maria happened to be walking past the hallway on the 5B wing when she noticed a forgotten cardboard box left near the emergency exit. Scribbled on the outside were the words, "Kindness Relief Box, Donation." She bent down and opened it. Inside were a few packets of bread, some dried fruit, shelf-stable milk, granola bars, tissues, single-use toothbrushes, and other small essentials. Maria stood still for a moment. A small decision was made, one so simple, yet enough to change everything. That evening, just as Nora returned, not yet having set down her bag, Maria walked up to her. She didn't say much. She simply handed her a plastic bag filled with the items from the box she had found earlier. "I thought, you might need this." Nora looked puzzled, then took the bag, stammering, Thank you. I don't know what to say." Maria gave a small nod and turned away, her eyes shifting slightly, as if afraid that lingering too long might reveal something too soft within her. But inside both women, something had quietly begun to kindle. Not pity, but connection. Not loud or dramatic. Just the kind that happens when one person offers something silently and the other accepts it, with quiet gratitude. The next morning, as Nora went out to buy breakfast, Maria was surprised when Max tilted his head politely and gave her a crooked little smile, his eyes shy. "Are you the one who helped my mom?" he asked. Maria paused for a second, then nodded softly. "Yes." Lucia, coloring in a small book by her bedside, suddenly chimed in, "My mom is really nice, but she gets sad a lot. Can your mom make her smile?" That innocent question made Maria look at her daughter as if, for the first time in 2 weeks, she was truly hearing the things Lucia noticed. Watching the two children chat so naturally, something inside her softened. That night, Nora came back with a small paper box. Inside was a still warm apple pie, hastily wrapped in brown paper from the restaurant. She had planned to save it for Max, but after handing him his share, she hesitated. Then, summoning what little courage she had, Nora stepped over to Lucia's bed. "Miss Maria, I brought some pie. It's not much, but if you and Lucia aren't allergic?" Maria hesitated, but Lucia, catching the smell, looked up. She asked, "Apple pie? My mom loves that." Maria let out a soft breath, then nodded. That evening, for the first time, the four of them sat together on 2 metal hospital chairs and a thin mat laid on the floor. They shared apple pie, passed around a bottle of water, and talked about things none of them had expected to say out loud. "I divorced my husband when Max was 3, Nora said, her voice steady, like she was talking about someone distant. "He was an alcoholic. Didn't work. One time, Max got hit for spilling a beer. After that, I filed for divorce and left with him. I've done every job, dishwashing, handing out flyers, waiting tables, but I've never once stopped taking care of my kid." Maria said nothing, Her eyes fell on the rough calluses on Nora's hands, hands that had carried buckets, balanced trays, folded thousands of napkins each month. Then she spoke. "My husband died in a bombing in Kandahar. The only thing they recovered was a scorched wallet with a photo of me and Lucia inside. Lucia was still in preschool back then." Nora looked up at Maria for the first time, without feeling ashamed. Between them, there was no longer rich or poor, black or white, only loss and pain, the kind that doesn't care about skin color or bank accounts. In the nights that followed, they began helping each other more and more. Every afternoon, when Nora changed into her diner uniform, rushing to make her shift 6 blocks from the hospital, she always bowed her head slightly and said quietly, "If anything comes up, could you keep an eye on Max for me?" Maria would simply nod, but she always stood up quietly, checked Max's temperature, adjusted his blanket, and reminded Lucia to tell him a story. Lucia loved telling fairy tales. Max preferred to draw, scribbled pictures with hospital-issued crayons, 2 kids sharing pie, a rainbow, or simply 2 hands holding each other. One time, Lucia asked, "Mom, can I be friends with Max?" Maria leaned down, responding gently, "What do you think about Max?" Lucia answered immediately, without hesitation, "It's like there's a part inside him that's broken too, like me." Maria looked at her daughter, and for the first time, realized the child she thought was fragile had come to understand something even adults sometimes couldn't grasp. One night, it rained. Nora came back late, her hair soaked, her uniform stained with grease and rainwater. Maria stood up quietly and handed her the only dry towel they had left. Maria said, "You need to switch shifts. Your body can't keep handling these late nights." Nora gave a tired but genuine smile. "I know, but they need someone in the kitchen. If I quit, they'll just hire someone else." Maria looked like she was about to say something, then stopped. Instead, she reached into her bag and pulled out an old notebook. Tucked inside were a few grocery store coupons and a printed list of local food pantries and support services for single-parent families. She handed it to Nora. "This I got from an old friend. Maybe give it a try." Nora took it, her eyes misting with quiet gratitude. From a forgotten donation box, from a warm apple pie shared in the middle of the night, their relationship had become something almost sacred. Just 2 mothers, standing guard over the long nights of the hospital, each with her own past, her own private pain. But when a child spiked a fever, when the heart monitor blared, they would both rise, together, call the nurse, hold each other's hand. Down the hallway of 5B, the nurses began to get used to the image. 2 women sitting side by side at midnight, next to the beds lined up near the window. Sometimes they didn't even talk, just shared a sip of water, let out a long sigh. But in that silence, a friendship was quietly forged, out of empathy, out of unconditional presence, and out of a kind of quiet hope neither of them dared say aloud. A few nights later, rain began to fall over Portland in the late afternoon. By nightfall, distant thunder rolled in waves, rattling the window panes of the 5B wing. Inside room 2, the soft amber glow of the nightlight warmed the space. Max and Lucia, 2 children who had once been strangers, now slept peacefully, each in their own bed, with only a small step of space between them. Lucia had dozed off after an afternoon of drawing and playing word games with Max. Maria sat by the window, her laptop open as she tried to finish up a bit of work. Since her husband's death, Maria often stayed up late, not exactly because of insomnia, but because of a quiet fear, the fear of missing a moment when her daughter might need her. She glanced at the clock. It was nearly 10 p.m. Nora still hadn't returned from work, and then suddenly, Max began to whimper in his sleep. At first, they were just indistinct sounds, but then they turned into fragmented whispers. "I didn't lie. Please, don't tell my dad. I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Maria's eyes immediately shot toward his bed. The boy had begun to cry and thrash. Lucia stirred. She sat up abruptly, looking at Max with wide, confused eyes before breaking into tears of her own. "Mom, what's wrong with Max? Is he hurting?" The sobbing, unexpected and raw, cut straight through Maria. She dropped the laptop, tossed the blanket aside, and rushed to Max's bed. In a heartbeat, she was there, both arms reaching out by instinct. She placed one hand gently on his chest, the other wrapping around his small shoulders, pulling him into a protective embrace, as if he were her own child. "Max, listen to me. You're dreaming. You're safe here. No one's going to hurt you. No one, sweetheart." But Max didn't wake. He curled further into himself, his arms rising in an instinctive gesture of defense, and tears spilled down his cheeks as he choked out the words, "Please don't lock me in again. I promise I won't do it wrong. Please don't lock the door." His voice cracked, as fragile as shattered glass. Lucia was still sobbing in her bed, clutching the bed rail with trembling hands, her frightened eyes fixed on her friend. Maria held Max close and turned her head, calling out gently, "Lucia, it's okay, sweetheart. Just breathe slowly. Look at me. I'm right here." She had done something she never imagined she would. She held a stranger's child, panicked and trembling, as if he were her own. No plan, no calculation, just the heartbeat of a mother echoing loudly in the middle of a rainy night. A night shift nurse, hearing the crying, rushed into the room. Maria spoke quickly, her voice steady but urgent. "He's having a sleep-related psychotic episode. I think it's PTSD. He's stable when awake, but the trauma resurfaces in his dreams." The nurse immediately retrieved a light sedative and paged the on-call doctor. Meanwhile, Maria continued whispering softly into Max's ear. "You're not there anymore. You're in the hospital now. With Mama Nora, with Lucia, and with me." Minutes later, the sedative began to work. Max's breathing slowed, his voice faded, and he drifted off again, tears still streaked across his cheeks. Maria gently brushed the hair from his forehead, then turned and wiped Lucia's tears with her handkerchief. And in that moment, she realized something. Motherhood didn't have to come from blood. Sometimes it was as simple as a child crying in the middle of the night and a pair of arms that were open in time. Nora returned not long after, her thin restaurant-issued raincoat clinging to her shoulders, hair soaked and matted to her forehead, the smell of kitchen grease mingling with rainwater. She paused in the doorway the moment she saw Maria sitting beside Max, her hand resting gently on the boy's shoulder. Lucia had fallen back asleep, her eyes still puffy from crying. The hospital room was wrapped in an eerie calm. Nora stepped in quietly. "Did something happen?" she asked. Maria looked up and replied softly, "Max had a nightmare and panicked a bit. The nurse gave him a mild sedative." Nora's voice caught, her eyes misting. Thank you for being here." Maria didn't answer right away. She shook her head slowly and said, "I only did what any mother would." They sat side by side then, not two mothers separated by skin color, circumstance, or class, but two women who had weathered a storm together. From that night on, Nora entrusted Maria with more than just favors. She began to truly rely on her. Every time she left for work, she would talk to Max and remind him, "If anything happens, call for Ms. Maria," and Max would nod without fear. As for Maria, though still disciplined and reserved, she began learning how to let others in. She spent time playing with the two children, reading to them, and for the first time in a long while, the room filled with shared laughter. One night, Lucia whispered, "Mommy, I think Max is my first best friend."
So?
Maria nodded, her eyes softening. "I think you're Max's first best friend, too." A few nights later, Pete, Nora's boss, having learned about her son's condition, handed her a small apple pie and tucked beneath it a thin envelope containing several crisp $100 bills, a gesture that meant more than words could express. Nora cried when she saw it. That evening, she shared the pie with Maria, Lucia, and Max. The four of them sat together on the floor, backs against the hospital wall, like some makeshift little family, fragile but warm, bound not by blood, but by kindness. Lucia suddenly asked, "If one day we're no longer in the same room, will we still get to see each other?" Maria looked at her daughter, then at Nora. Both women smiled, saying nothing, but knowing with certainty in their hearts, from that moment on, they would never again be strangers. Max and Lucia were born just 3 days apart. One afternoon, while they were coloring side by side, Lucia proudly told Max, "My birthday's next week." Max's eyes widened. "Really?" Mine too. When Nora and Maria overheard the excited chatter, they simply exchanged glances, silent but full of thought. Neither spoke aloud, but both mothers shared the same quiet wish. Even the smallest bit of joy shouldn't be forgotten in a stark white room that smelled of antiseptic. That night, after Max had fallen asleep and Lucia was away for a quick checkup with the nurse, Nora leaned toward Maria and whispered, "What if we throw them a birthday?" Maria hesitated. "But I don't think the hospital would allow anything too loud," she said uncertainly. Nora gave a quiet smile. "I have a way." They spent the rest of the evening planning, not a flashy party, no balloons, no grand cake with flickering candles. Instead, each would contribute something small, but full of love. Nora asked her boss at the restaurant to bake a batch of small, low-sugar chocolate chip cookies packaged cleanly. Maria, at home later that night, carefully crafted 2 birthday hats from pages torn out of an old medical journal, topping them with prescription label stickers. Lucia, after therapy the next day, drew a big handmade card with messy but heartfelt letters. "Max and Lucia, birthday roommates." That morning, their joint birthday began quietly. There were no elaborate decorations. After the morning checkups, Maria carefully spread a napkin across the bedside table and laid out a few cookies and 2 cups of diluted fruit juice. Lucia wore a faded white dress with pale blue flowers, the one her mother had brought from home. Max wore the button-down shirt gifted by Pete, the restaurant owner, just a week earlier. The 2 children were giddy with excitement. When Maria placed the paper hat onto Lucia's head, the little girl burst into laughter. Seeing her, Max laughed too, his first genuine smile after weeks in the hospital. But just as they were about to begin singing, the door suddenly swung open. A woman in a white uniform entered. The head nurse, her face stern. Nora paled. Maria stood up quickly and instinctively moved to shield the tray of cookies. "I'm sorry. The head nurse stepped forward, her eyes sweeping across the table and the 2 children sitting upright with their paper hats. A long, weighted silence followed. Then, without a word, she set her medical bag down, unzipped it, and pulled out an old ukulele. "I should probably be telling you to keep it down," she said softly. "But today, I think I'd rather do something else." She smiled gently, her eyes resting on the 2 wide-eyed children. "What song do you like?" she asked. Max hesitated. I'm not sure." Lucia whispered, "My mom sings 'You Are My Sunshine' to me, whenever I'm sad." The head nurse nodded. She sat down on a chair, placed the ukulele across her lap, and began to strum the opening chords. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine." Her voice wasn't perfect, but it was warm and steady, like a silent blessing sent to these 2 little ones who had found each other amid the shattered pieces of their lives. Maria and Nora stood side by side, eyes shimmering with tears. Lucia and Max sang along to the chorus, their childish voices blending with the gentle strumming of the ukulele. The soft yellow light shimmered in the tears that welled up in the eyes of the adults. The birthday party lasted just over 20 minutes. No expensive gifts, no grand feast. But there were things far more precious. A hand-drawn card, a song, a grateful look that didn't need words. That night, before falling asleep, Lucia hugged Max. "Today has been the happiest day since I got here," she whispered. Max nodded, then murmured, "I hope we can have a birthday party together again someday." From the corner of the room, Maria and Nora sat watching them. The 2 mothers quietly exchanged a smile. 5 years later. It was drizzling in Portland that day, a fine mist that soaked through clothes and made anyone walking down the street stop for a moment, look up, and take a deep breath. Tucked away on a quiet street near the old hospital stood a small bakery with a curious name, Roommate. Inside, the smell of baked apples and cinnamon filled the air. Nora, now the owner, wore a coarse linen apron, her hair neatly tied up. She no longer looked thin and worn as she once had. Her face was fuller now, her eyes softer. Max, taller now, with rosy cheeks, was helping his mom arrange pastries on the shelves. The doorbell chimed. Maria stepped in. Beside her was Lucia, now 12, holding a small card and cheerfully waving at Max. Hey, birthday buddy, let's have another party together. Max grinned and ran over, secretly slipping her a freshly baked cinnamon cookie. The two kids giggled like they always had. That afternoon, the four of them sat by the window, where the pale rain blurred the glass. The space was filled with laughter. Slices of apple pie warm with cinnamon were shared, and from a small speaker came the gentle tune of "You Are My Sunshine," like a tender memory returning home. Some friendships don't require shared backgrounds, skin colors, or pasts. Sometimes all it takes is a hallway chair, half a cookie, or a glance in the middle of the night to turn two strangers into a place of refuge for each other. Friends aren't defined by who came first or last. They're the ones who, once they arrive, never leave.